I'm almost embarrassed to say, Pete, I knew you were into this leadership thing, and I always thought it was a little airy fairy because I was successful at what I did, right? But all of a sudden, I was in a position where I didn't feel like I was in a position to succeed. And I'm like, I need a mentor or a wingman to help me through some of these decision processes that I needed to go through to build this system. Because whatever I have right now is not engineered to go down the runway. And so that's when I'm like, Pete, I need you. I don't know what for, but we've got to talk.
Welcome, everyone, to the Leadership Shock podcast. My name is Pete Steinberg, and this is a podcast series linked with the book that I have called Leadership Shock that helps leaders through transitions. The theme of this podcast is going to be really diving deep into the Leadership Shock model and talking about role expectation. And I have an old friend of mine that I helped through Leadership Shock, Paul Kononoff, from the University of Nebraska. So, Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Pete. It's good to catch up again.
It is good to catch up because we have a good history. So, do you remember when we met? Do you actually remember when we met? I don't know if it's like a blinding thing that you've never forgotten.
I think I do. I think it was 1998 when I moved from Canada, Saskatchewan, to do my PhD at Penn State. And I just ended up at the rugby pitch because that was a place I was comfortable. And yeah, I remember seeing you running around and coaching on the field. And I think it probably was the men's club at that time. So yeah, I
So the
think
Happy
remember
Valley Barbarians.
it. Well, no, it was
Barbarians?
that came after. You introduced me to the Barbarians later, but it was actually the men's club. Yeah.
Oh, like the Penn State men's team.
Yeah. Actually, well, I don't know how much time we have, but a little background to that. I mean, I kind of relate to international students showing up on campus and just seeing a lot of strange surroundings and looking for a place for friends. And obviously, the rugby pitch is where I went first, and then you had talked to me about coaching, and it just seemed like a great place to find sense of belonging. I guess that's the term they use. And yeah, the rest is history.
Had you thought about coaching before I talked to you? Was that something? Had you done coaching before?
So I had done a little bit of coaching. I think physically, I was still really interested in playing. I had done a little bit of coaching for my former high school team. It was a group of high school boys I had coached before. But really not. Maybe one season, and I was working, so I wasn't there every time. So that was really the first introduction to official coaching, I think.
And I was pretty outnumbered by Canadians because I was British, and there was you, and then there was another Canadian called Dan LeBlanc, and
Grand
we
Dan.
coached
They called him Grand Dan. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because the Canadian red jersey, right? So I think
Yeah.
that was like always
right.
typical Canadian, always wearing his Canadian stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we coached for a few years while you did your PhD. We had a lot of success with the Penn State women's rugby team. So when you reflect on that time and the coaching that we did together, what did you take out of that coaching that you applied in the future as a leader?
Yeah. So I think, when I think back to that time, and obviously you were a leader in that situation. When I think back, one of the things that I learned early on, I noticed it early on with you, and then I took later on in coaching, but just the whole notion of player development. I think when you're a player, and then maybe dabbling in coaching, you focus on the best players and you're starting 15. And I really didn't give a lot of thought to the greater number of individuals that came to practice or that were interested, maybe even just checking things out on the sideline. And so when you grow a team, an organization, I'm convinced one of the successes, a big success for Penn State, was player development. And so to recognize those players, they may not be on the top 15, but you find an individual that maybe isn't gifted athletically, but she comes into her own later on and she learns the game, or maybe she's really good at administration or a treasurer or something like that. But this whole notion of development and working with people other than your top 15 players, that was a big thing that I learned.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, and it's something that, like, I have to say, Paul, that playing with you, you were much
Yeah.
more competitive than I was. So you were a very competitive player, and I think we balanced each other out because you were
Yeah.
more the competitive coach, and I was more the development coach. And I think that's part of
Yeah.
what makes that's what part
Yeah.
that's what makes a good team. I think.
Yeah, I mean, the chemistry, I mean, it has to be top down, like all the way through the players and then bottom up with the coaching. And yeah, I think like you, myself, and Dan, we also just had really good chemistry, very different personalities. As you mentioned,
Yeah.
Dan was an aerospace engineer, so very analytical. And yeah, you're right. I think it was a good mix of personalities as well. And then maybe just the other thing is, just having people, a culture where people are learning from each other. Whether it's the coaches learning from each other or the players learning from each other. Because Pete, you remember I mean, I don't know what it's like now at Penn State, but I remember it was like the three of us and 80 players, with
Yeah,
like
it was maybe not
75% of
80,
which,
but like 60, yeah, like 60, 65, I think was probably, but it was a lot.
and what
Yeah.
percent had never played the game. So that was it
Oh,
was
like, yeah,
overwhelming.
almost all of them. Almost all of them, right? So there was always a group of
Yeah.
people that came in and were like, they would turn up, they would say, um, oh, I want to come play rugby, and would say, have you ever seen rugby? And they'll
Yeah.
say, no. And you're like, see, to
Yeah.
teach a new sport to someone who had never seen it, it was like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy.
There's a
Now,
lot of
Paul, most of
learning.
the kids that play at Penn State played in high school.
That's what I've been seeing.
A
Yeah.
lot
Just
of
follow them
learning.
on.
So we didn't actually like work together on leadership shock around rugby coaching. We did it in around your career and a particular role that you were taking. So
Hmm.
talk to me a little bit about your career and how you ended up in this editor in chief role, which is
Yeah.
where we work together.
Yeah. Yeah. So Pete, when I was at graduate school, I was studying dairy science, animal nutrition. And to make a long story short, I ended up at the University of Nebraska in a faculty position where I'm a professor of dairy nutrition. Our professional society is called American Dairy Science Association. That's an association that puts on an annual scientific meeting and then also publishes its own journal. And I don't know, maybe halfway into my career at Nebraska, I started being involved with the journal first as a section editor and then as a senior editor. And so um, that was exactly that, serving as an editor for a peer review publication. The job of an editor is essentially to handle manuscripts as they go through the peer review process. So, to identify people that are capable of evaluating the paper scientifically and then ultimately making a decision based on their recommendations. Um, and then spot opened up to take, I guess it's the lead position in that journal as editor in chief. And through that, I stepped through that door to lead the journal.
So this is always really interesting because you have this job, you're a successful professor. Why did you
Mm,
take the editor in chief role? Because
yeah,
that was a big step for you. So what was it that made you take
yeah,
that role?
yeah. It was a big step. I think, like a lot of things, you take steps without really understanding where you're going. I mean, just like back to our time taking a step to Penn State, I had no idea where that would lead your careers. Yeah. So as I worked with the journal, um, I got an invitation to serve as the editor in chief, and be honest, when it was offered to me, I guess I really didn't understand what the position was. But the association had been so good to me in my career, not only giving me opportunities with the association, but also working with the journal. And the journal gave me tremendous opportunities to be involved in a community of dairy scientists. And so I took the job really as editor in chief to serve the association and serve the journal.
Got it. So it sounds like it's a bit of a, it was something, I mean, it's to be at service, right? So it's sort of,
Yeah.
you got a lot out of it. It was part of
Hmm.
something that you felt almost an obligation to
Yeah.
do because it wasn't, you know, it wasn't necessarily a career
Yeah.
benefiting move. It was more
Yeah.
something that you felt obliged to do.
Yeah, I think, people will take those kind of roles for different reasons. I hate to use the word duty because it's not very exciting and it sounds almost dubious. But I really felt like it seems like the journal needed me and the journal had given me so much. And there's only a certain number of people that are at their stage of their career with their expertise that can step into that role. And so I'll use the term duty, but I'm going to use it with just a lot of blurry edges around it. But I did step in to give something back. Yeah,
So you take the role,
yeah,
and at some point after you take the role, you reach out to me. So talk to me about what was
yeah,
going on that
yeah,
made you reach out to me. And we
yeah.
hadn't connected for a while, right?
Right.
So talk a little bit
Yeah,
about that.
yeah. So I had I think I was full professor at the time, so I had kind of earned my stripes as in my real job as a professor, and I kind of understood how to be a successful faculty member, a successful scientist, and I really felt like I was in a groove. I got the game, and then this opportunity came up. And initially, I thought, just like many other things in my life, I'm a big systems person. And I felt like, all throughout my career, I've developed systems that work for me, and I have tools that work for me in whatever role that I'm in. And very early on in my role as editor in chief, I just realized that these tools were not working. Now you wouldn't have seen it from the outside, but I couldn't get it. There were, meetings, people talking to me, and I was trying to triangulate what I was supposed to be doing, where we were supposed to be going, and I was just really confused. I'll use the word panic, although I wouldn't you wouldn't see that from the outside, and it's not a dangerous panic.
Right.
It was just like this system wasn't working, and yeah, I knew. I mean, Pat, I'm almost embarrassed to say, Pete, I knew you were into this leadership thing. And I always thought it was a little airy fairy because I was successful at what I did, right? But all of a sudden, I was in a position where I didn't feel like I was in a position to succeed. And I'm like, I need a mentor or a wingman to help me through some of these decision processes that I needed to go through to build this system because whatever I have right now is not engineered to go down the runway. And so that's when I'm like, Pete, I need you. I don't know what for, but we've got to talk.
Yeah, I mean, so two things, Paul. First of all, you just gave, I think, a really good example of leadership shock because leadership shock happens to successful people because
Mm-hmm.
it happens because they learn their behaviors and they learn their approach to leadership and the ways of working that have been
Mm-hmm.
successful for them, and because it's been successful for them they assume it's going to move forward. I actually think that for you actually showed a lot of self-awareness to be like something's not right, and the
Mm-hmm.
fact that you're a systems thinker I think
Mm-hmm.
really really helped you get there, which is like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to change my system but I'm not getting there. But
Mm-hmm.
I do
Mm-hmm.
remember you were very upfront, like when we first talked, where you're like this leadership woo woo, airy fairy
Mm-hmm.
stuff. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure I believe any of it,
Mm-hmm.
but, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm stuck, so I need some help.
Desperate.
Like it's one of those moments.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
Yeah.
so desperate. I'm even going to reach out to you, Pete. I think that's what we're saying.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the challenges that I think you had in the editor in chief role is that you didn't actually have a boss, right?
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
reported to a board.
Yeah.
So um, talk about how we how the work that we did together helped you interact and change the way that you worked with the board.
Right. So I think maybe just as because I had background with the journal, it was pretty clear to me that an important critical thing for the journal was that um, we needed to um, receive publications, evaluate them scientifically, and then ethically make decisions and publish them. And it was that side of the business that I felt like I understood, and I thought editor in chief was just more of that. And what I soon found out is um, that that was part of the job, and that I was also involved in board meetings with the board. And it was also a time where the association actually had a vacancy for the executive director. And so I really didn't have anybody. Technically, I answered to the board, but I really didn't understand how that board responsibilities dovetailed into my responsibilities as editor in chief. Um, and that's something that you really helped me out with early on. You helped me set up and understand the expectations that were of me, and we spent a lot of time just talking. Um, I remember you asked me, "Well, what are your expectations?" And I gave you a whole laundry list of things that I was responsible for, and you just kind of pushed that aside and you said, "No, but Paul, what kind of things would happen are expected out of you if you were not in that position?" And we spent a lot of time just talking through what I think we've identified as expectations of me as editor in chief. Those expectations were certainly from editors, from authors, from staff, but also from the board and then the soon to become executive director.
That's great, Paul. So one of the things that we talked about um, was that you had this board, but it isn't like a unified body. It actually has a whole bunch of different people that have different, maybe, I mean, maybe agendas are the wrong word, but maybe different views of what the publication should do. So talk a little bit about how, you know, the authentic leadership model we worked on helped you navigate sort of some of
Mm-hmm.
the politics,
Mm-hmm.
which if there's something I know about you, Paul, is you're not a politician and you don't really suffer politicians
Yeah.
that well. But this was kind of
Yeah.
like a political
Yeah.
space,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. So you're right. I'm not one that likes to maybe naturally go to board meetings and even be the spokesperson. That's just not my comfort zone. The board, it's so our association, as I said, I mean, just a wonderful association. Everybody that's on the board, it's also a voluntary position, and all of them are scientists from around the world and high power scientists, very clever individuals, and also really passionate not only about the association, but because with also the journal as well, because this was a journal that they work with. They publish their science in. Their graduate students publish their work in it. So they were really invested into the journal. Thought knew that it was important not only to the association, but their careers and the community and just dairy in general. Um, these are individuals. So, are the way our association's set up is there's two sides of there's two groups really. There's what we call the foods group, and these are people that study milk and what you do with it. So you make cheese, ice cream, you understand the microbiology of it and the science of doing things with milk. And then the other side is the production side, where you have scientists that are studying, how to make milk and what are the implications on the animal's health and that kind of thing. And so even these are two different cultures as well. But many of these people, because they're very interested, they would always tell me their view on the journal. And it was great. And, as you know, I love to listen. I love to listen more than I do talk. But at the same time, as a leader, you need to act. And, that was probably a time where I'm pretty sure, spurred me, one of the things that spurred me to talk to you. It's like, okay, I'm assembling this information. Somehow I got to act. And so there was a lot of
Right.
confusion around that as well. So, the board, tremendous people, very smart individuals, committed individuals, but I never really understood my role as well with that board, and that was something that you and I talked through as well, which was critical for me. And I think any association is making sure everybody understands their role and their position. Nobody wants to be somewhere and wondering what they're doing there, right? It's just not a good place to be mentally, especially if
That's
you're
right.
busy.
That's right. Well, so I mean, I think this takes me to another place that it reminds me. So I think one of the things that in the role was that role of leader. Like you prefer to be back of house, but actually you need to be front of house. And if I remember
Mm-hmm.
correctly, Paul, we actually talked about there's a big annual conference and people talk, and you were like, I don't really want to talk at this thing. Like I
Yeah,
don't want to be up
yeah,
there talking. But
right.
actually, your role, like if you really wanted to position the publication to be successful, if you wanted to move it, you had to be front of house. You had to talk in front of the group. And I think what was useful for you was that once you understood that was part of the role that you had to play, it made sense for you to do it. It wasn't a natural inclination, but it was something that allowed you to like be like not natural. And the same way with the board, not natural to engage with this group in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, I'm the leader,
Yeah,
right? I'm the leader of the
yeah,
publication, and
yeah,
therefore it's a
yeah.
requirement.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, really, just for so many reasons, I think you unlock some doors in my head that I didn't even know existed. I know coming on into that role, the only thing I knew were the leaders before me. The leaders before
Right.
me were really talented, really good, and different from what I was. Just different personalities. They did things differently. They had different strong suits, and right away I'm thinking, well, I must need to be this person or that person, and this person had these strengths. I need to have these same identical strength and do what they did. And of course, that was when I'm like, I'm not comfortable with this. This isn't me. And so, for you to take some time, literally, to say, well, Paul, like, what are your strengths? And it's not a place mentally I like to spend a lot of time thinking, but to distill that down and say, well, what do I have to offer to the journal and to the association? And once we identified those things, and I realized, oh, well, that's what I get to apply in those situations where I am, on the podium or I am the spokesperson. I can apply it in that way, very much different than those that were before me. But I was comfortable in doing that and recognizing that. Instead of wondering what you don't have, you realize what you do have, and it's a much more, I guess, empowering position to be when you've identified that in your head.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting because I'm actually working with a client right now who is potentially in line to be the CEO of their organization. And they have exactly the same problem that you have or had, Paul, which was they look at the previous CEOs and they're like, that's not how I want to lead. And so the assumption was, therefore, I shouldn't be the CEO versus you can be the CEO how you want to be the CEO. You can be different. And that's one of the challenges that we all have as leaders is that we're really driven by the role models that we've seen only, and we never see ourselves as a role model,
Right,
right?
right,
So
yeah.
we always see others as role models, but we never see ourselves as role models. So I have one more question about your leadership
Mm-hmm.
and sort of like the role expectation, which was you talked about your journey as an editor and a senior editor and then the editor in chief. Well, and we've talked about your role in managing the board, which is
Mm-hmm.
up, but talk
Mm-hmm.
about what it was like managing down, right? You had
Yeah,
senior editors that were your peers
yeah,
that now reported to you.
yeah,
That can't be easy. And talk through
yeah,
how the way we work together may have helped unlock that too.
yeah, yeah. So, I think, as I mentioned, just like the board, the editors, I mean, that is a star-studded group of scientists. I mean, if you ever had to find you probably haven't spent a lot of time looking for a dream team of dairy scientists, but it is that group. Very smart people, like at the top of their career, intellectually very quick, well spoken. And then all of a sudden, you're in this position of leadership of that group, which for me, as I mentioned, was a little bit uncomfortable. But I don't see it. What I've learned is that it's not that much different than leading a rugby team. I mean, you have these people with different strengths and with different suits, and your goal is to coalesce this group of people to work together. And I think we mentioned earlier, about the team Penn State having the team learn from each other, and that was a culture that was very clear once you and I talked, that I really had to ensure that we instilled this culture and built this culture where people can learn from each other, because there's not enough time in the day. We have 28 editors that are around the world for me to be working with each individual one to teach them, what their responsibilities were, and that we had to identify some leaders in that group and make sure we had good communication there, and just establish that culture of learning together. So that was really important. The other thing is, these people are busy. They're part of the association, and it was clear another responsibility for me was to be an advocate for them as editors to the board. The board is very interested in the journal and what's going on, and I realize that that's my role, is also to be an advocate for these individuals. Again, they're also volunteers giving of their time. They want to do the best thing possible. They have needs. They need to demonstrate, what their contributions are, and so really understanding that role as an advocate was really important to me. And then it's just great. Like, we go to these meetings, and it's no different than a team meeting. You have these people that it's just this team environment. It's really quite cool. And knowing that it was, leading a team and recognizing what that team looked like. Quite frankly, never had that experience before professionally.
Wow, that's a pretty amazing statement, right?
Hmm.
That you've never had that. Now, admittedly, you're in academia. That's a little bit
Hmm.
different than the other people that we have on our podcast series who are from business. But but the challenge of leading experts, right? People that
Hmm.
I know you, Paul, people that you think are smarter than you, know more than you, right? Is a real one for all leaders. And actually, it like I don't need to be smarter. Like, leadership isn't about being smarter. Leadership is about leading. It's about getting people to maximize their ability as a team, and having really smart, talented people is actually makes it easier than if you don't have that. You know.
One of the things really has resonated with me almost every day that I've since been with the journal. One of the things that you charged me with is that you said, "Well, Paul, it sounds like one of your greatest expectations is um, to ensure the well-being of the journal." And like, when that hit, then I realized that a lot of the other stuff, the leadership stuff, all of a sudden becomes not easy, but more simplified. If you understand, well, this is what's expected of you, the well-being of the journal, and then you just move the pieces around for that goal, the well-being of the organization, or in our case, it was the journal. And so it was really key for me to identify that was a big, important expectation of mine.
Yeah, because it also leads. I mean, it links to your idea of obligation and duty. Like,
Hmm.
it isn't your journal,
Yeah.
right? There's a
Right.
sense of like you have some responsibility for some time,
Hmm.
and then you're going to hand over to someone else,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
a little bit like we always said at Penn State, leave the team better than you found it, right? And so
Yeah.
your job is to
Yeah.
leave the journal better than you
Hmm.
found it, and to be a
Hmm.
caretaker, right?
Yeah.
And to care for its well being. So
Hmm.
that's I'm glad
Hmm.
that resonated, and it still resonates
Hmm.
with me
Hmm.
as we talk about it.
Hmm.
When in our work together, what other aspects of the authentic leadership model stood out for you as impactful? We've talked a lot about role expectation, but what's
Hmm.
some of the other aspects?
Well, uh, you had this element called priorities. I've read parts of your book. I'm really curious to know how you define it, because I'm not sure I even know what it's defined. But I found that very useful. Um, it's easy, often I show up to work and I'll write out 5 things on a list of things I want to do. Almost always those are things that I like to do. And so to identify things um, that may not necessarily come natural to me. It's not that I dislike them, but maybe I'll do other things before. So really trying to identify um, what those priorities are. So, like, for me, maybe an example is communication. Um, Making sure I have very timely communication. It's not that I don't like to email or I don't like to talk to people, but I want to do it really thoroughly. So really to stake out that I will have timely and rapid communication, even if it's just I got your message, I will respond in great detail instead of waiting. Oh, I'm going to get to that email and I'm going to write 3 clear, well thought out paragraphs. So trying to identify the things that are really important that need to be done that you may not, you just need to be reminded of. And I think it was useful for me to identify what those things were.
So talk a little bit about, you know, when you reflect now, how are you different as a leader? What has changed about the way you've led because of the work that we've done together?
Mm-hmm. Well, in some ways, it was a good. I think your program was a good series of uh, therapies, and I hope your book is a good self help book. But it really helped me understand, like, and gave me the confidence to take the field, right? So identifying what my strengths were, and what I brought to the game or to the journal. So taking that field with more confidence, and I guarantee I wouldn't have had you and I not spent time going through your program. So that's been a big thing. The other one is I know we established my vision, and I remember thinking, well, that's front stage and center. That's what we should attack. Once we identify that, and it's going to take a lot of work, then we can move on. Well, for you identifying my value, my leadership approach, my expectations, and then all of a sudden, like towards the end, we got to the my vision, and it's not that we didn't spend time and effort putting into it, but man, it came way easier and maybe more importantly, more naturally than I ever thought my vision would come. I think we've all sat in meetings where you do mission statements and visions, and they're kind of painful and they're not natural. They don't unravel naturally. But it seems like once I followed this circuitry that you put together, the vision was really readily apparent.
Yeah, and I think part of that is just you're being metacognitive. You're thinking, you're reflecting, and I think one of the interesting things about when we worked together was as we like, it's not like you wait till the end and then you're like, now I'm going to be a different leader. As you go through it, you started to change things. You're like, oh, I had this meeting and I did something differently because of what we did.
Yeah.
And I think it is going on that journey, and that metacognition, that deep reflection, changes your mindset about vision, right? And it changes the way you view yourself, and it changes the way that like the things that you want to do. And I think, yeah, it should. And the hope is, Paul, that you never have to call me again. It may be a bad business model, but the hope is that like you now have some skills that allow you for your next transition to move forward.
Yeah. Well, and let me say that, like, and I don't know if you use the term in your book, but I really believe that this is like some circuitry that I can carry around in my head. And so I have done that, without going into a lot of details. I've had other things where I've had to step in as a leader, maybe in a smaller realm. But yeah, I've been able to plug in this circuitry and apply it to that, and it's been amazing to me just how robust it's made my leadership approach. I wouldn't have expected it.
That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, and I appreciate you, Paul. You're willing to have this conversation. Your case study is in the book. Even in the book, we have your the system that you drew out. You took, which is very Paul. You took like your new leadership system or your new leadership approach, and you built a system around it, and you turned it into a graphic. And I think that was really, really powerful. So thank you so much for sharing your story, and it's great to connect to you again. We should find a time when you guys are going to come out to Colorado,
Yeah.
like with whatever kids that you have left at home. But if you ever come out west, hopefully we can get to connect together, or at least on the sideline of a Penn State rugby game sometime.
I'd love to do that.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. No, thanks, Pete, for everything you've done for me. Really, it's just been tremendous. I really appreciate it and value your time.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. Well, it was great to have that conversation with my old friend and client, Paul Kononoff. Paul has had a great journey and some things that we really take away from his story. So the first is how important that role expectation is in how you manage the different stakeholders. So he was able to manage the board differently. He was able to manage the senior editors that worked with him differently. And so the role expectation is really critical in how you do that. I think the other thing that was important for Paul was the process itself of reflection, the metacognition, his ability to really think unlocked new opportunities and capabilities that he didn't realize he had. And then probably the third thing is that it kind of all fits together. But when he talked about how easy it was to come up with the vision, that's because of all the work that Paul had done earlier on in the process, right? It is a bit of a journey that gets there. But as you go through the journey, things do become easier. So role expectations, and we heard from Dr. Paul Kononoff and his role as editor-in-chief in a dairy science journal. Just a reminder that this is all part of the Leadership Shock series of podcasts that you can listen to that fit all the different areas and introduce people that have been through leadership shock and use the authentic leadership model. And if you want to know more, you'll find in the show notes a link to Amazon to be able to purchase the Leadership Shock book. It is designed to be used by anyone who's going through their career and finding themselves maybe not being their best self and their best leader. And it gives you an opportunity to go through exactly the same journey that Paul went through as he transitioned into a new role and struggled. You're ready to use the book to transition and be more successful as you move forward. So I would like to thank you for your time for listening and hope you'll check out one of the other episodes of the podcast.